Recently I had a few things align in a way that it seemed to be a sign, which led me to buy this Hagibis Monitor USB hub thingy for around 50 bucks. I saw this on AliExpress one day, put it on my list and forgot about it, until I saw this video, where someone builds a mini retro PC. It's a pretty cool watch, I've linked it in the description. I then saw I had some seeding money left, and with that we arrived at this point. Now let's get to what's in the box. You get the Hagibis Mini Monitor itself, a silicone foot to prop it up a little, a USB-C cable with an attached USB-C to A adapter, and the manual, which is in Chinese on one side and in English on the other side. I quickly want to talk about the cable. It's about 1 meter long and quite thick with 5 millimeters, roughly. The included adapter is attached with this hard rubber, but with a little bit of pushing, it can be taken off quite easily. Now, I would have loved for this to be twice as long, since I have a standing desk, and 1 meter just is not enough. But other than that, this seems to be a much better cable than I usually get from AliExpress items. But now to the main attraction, the mini monitor itself. It is styled after an old, like a retro PC and tube monitor. The screen itself is 3.5 inches in diameter and uses an IPS panel with a native resolution of 480 by 320. This is a 3:2 aspect ratio, by the way. It does, however, have a virtual resolution of 1920 by 1080, which is then scaled down to the native resolution. This is nice to see, since it helps with compatibility. One thing they don't list is the response time, but I suspect it's somewhere between 16 and 24 milliseconds, but I'll get to that a bit later. Now, one thing I saw in the reviews is that the glue on this black rim can be a bit weak, and some models came with it popped off, but it seems like quite an easy repair. But now to the hub part. On the back you have one USB-C purely for power. This is however not needed when using it as a hub, which brings me to the second USB-C, which is used for data transfer, power and display, if your device supports it of course. So with a modern laptop you might only need one cable. Next we have an HDMI in, when USB-C is not an option. One thing I didn't find anywhere is an input option, in case where you connect both the USB-C and the HDMI, so I think the HDMI will just take precedent over the USB-C. And last you have a 3.5mm headphone jack. I can't recommend it too much since it has some noise from interference. While something is playing you can't hear it, but once it gets quiet it's quite noticeable. Moving on to the front, you have both a normal and a micro SD card slot, a USB-C input claiming to be 5 gigabits per second, and two USB-A 3.0 ports with the same claim. And last, you have two buttons. One for turning the monitor on and off, and one for switching between 6 different brightness models, labeled 0 to 5. Next up, I tested the speeds of these ports. At first, I used this cable instead of the included one, and got pretty bad results. So just to be sure, I used the included one, and I got much better results. So I had to redo all the tests. For the tests, I used F3 and K-disk marks. I then ran them 3 times and averaged them out. First, I tested a micro SD card. Using the dock and F3, I got 92.92 megabytes a second reads and 16.7 megabytes a second writes. K-disk marks sequential tests provided me with a similar result, with a slightly higher 94.65 megabytes reads and 17.46 megabytes writes. Next up was K-disk marks random test, which can be seen as the worst case scenario, like transferring many small files. With it I got 5.33 megabytes a second reads and 1.6 megabytes a second writes. To get a good comparison, I used my regular transient SD card adapter, which I've used plenty up till now. I then plugged it into the same port I plugged the dock into. With it I got really similar results. F3 with 91.28 megabytes a second read and 16.66 megabytes a second writes. K-Disk sequential with 93.71 megabytes a second writes and 17.28 megabytes a second reads. And K-Disk Mock Random with 4.78 megabytes a second reads and 1.37 megabytes a second writes. I then moved over to the USB-C port using this M.2 SSD in a small caddy. On the dock with F3 I got 394.61 megabytes a second reads and 353.9 megabytes a second writes. K-Disk sequential got 383.26 megabytes a second reads and 348.84 megabytes a second writes. And K-Disk Mock Random got 74.08 megabytes a second reads and 67.5 megabytes a second writes. I then moved on to directly plugging it into my PC again, but I used this adapter here since my USB-C port was behaving a bit strangely. With this I got on F3 410.18 megabytes a second reads and 345.56 megabytes a second writes. On K-Disk sequential 419.46 megabytes a second reads and 372.92 megabytes a second writes. And with K-Disk Random 92.06 megabytes a second reads and 87.4 megabytes a second writes. I also tested the other ports, but the SD card slot behaved the same as the microSD card slots, and the two USB-A slots behave the same as the USB-C slots, making it not worth going through the reads and writes again. One thing that stood out is that the SSD performs slightly worse through the hub, but I would also argue that it's still plenty fast enough. But now moving on, and let's get to the monitor part. As I stated earlier, the resolution is 480 by 320. Personally, I set it at twice the resolution, at 960 by 640, since some applications have a minimum size which is often larger than the native resolution this monitor provides. The display is plenty bright and I'm satisfied with the 6 steps that it provides. I would have loved it though if the button was actually a dial. The display itself though doesn't make for a good reference monitor, since it is on the warmer side. To show you what it looks like, I overlaid a yellow image on my monitors and made a photo. This photo does illustrate my point, but in real life it isn't as extreme. I would say it's less like the skin of a lemon compared to that of an orange, and more like the skin of a lemon compared to orange shoes. Now, as for the response time, I don't have any fancy devices or high-speed cameras to measure the actual values. What I did though is film the left monitor with a 1 millisecond response time, the right one with a 6 milliseconds response time, and the Hagibis at the same time with my phone's slow-mo mode. The phone shoots at 120 FPS and then outputs a video that is 30 FPS, so you get 4 times slow-mo. With that being said, you can clearly see how the Hagibis takes longer to start transitioning to the next frame and also has this very clear wiping effect. With the naked eye, I cannot see the effect, but if I focus I can actually tell that it starts on the right and moves to the left. This brings me to the point that I originally wanted to hook up my PS2 or something and test it using it as a monitor for a quick gaming sesh, but the input lag is simply too noticeable. With that being said, the monitor uses a 3:2 aspect ratio, just like the PowerKitty V10 or the GBA. So while it might not be a good monitor for action-packed games, it actually works great for something like Pokemon. The whole gaming aspect aside though, having a small dedicated monitor can actually have quite some uses. I, as an example, have YouTube Music open, or you can have some monitoring software open for your PC or home lab. Use it as a digital picture frame for anything from your pets to your waifu, displaying a camera feed on it, and so on and so forth. You really can do a lot, and one thing I've been thinking about is creating a little awesome repository for the Hagibis, showing off websites and applications that work well on it. I do need some help for that though. You can recommend me software, for Linux mind you, and websites in the comments, and I can test them myself. Or you can test them yourself and add them to the repository as well. And this brings me to the conclusion. This Hagibis Mini Monitor USB thingy is quite endearing. The built-in hub works well and comes in quite handy to me since I moved my desk and I can no longer reach my USB ports as easily. The monitor itself is obviously not meant for gaming, but as a secondary display for some info it works great. And in the end it's also a nice looking display piece, since the whole tube monitor retro aesthetic is quite fun in my opinion. If you want to buy it, I've left links in the description. And with that we are at the end of the video. I hope this was useful to some of you.